You can ask anything.
Okay. Hello, sir. We are very happy to have you with us. Would you be kind enough to to tell us something about yourself for our students and for our listeners?
Thank you so much for having me here. I am indeed glad to be back at Nalsar. It is always wonderful to be back at Nalsar. I graduated from Nalsar in 2011, spent 5 good years here, and then I taught at Nalsar for 2 years. So Nalsar always is a very special place for me. So thank you for having me.
So, sir, since you have worked so much on on the educational policy of the government, especially the Right to Education Act, so I have some questions to you with respect to this. So, my first question would be, why do you think that parents prefer to send their children to private educational institutions instead of the government ones?
Right. So there are a number of factors for it.
Yeah.
First. First is that there's an impression that private schools are providing education of better quality. Um, that impression is also perhaps emerging from a perception that English has become an important factor, and private schools, in the impressions of people, seem to be doing a better job of teaching English. So that seems to be one reason. Another reason could be that nowadays they are carrying out surveys and suggest that private institutions are managing slightly better learning scores at lesser costs. That need not be by itself the best thing to happen, because we must examine at what costs the per child expenditure is reduced. At the same point of time, we also need to adjust for socio-economic inequalities in budgeting for the higher learning scores. And once that is done, and as some people have done, the difference is marginal.
Mhm.
Third, we also need to consider that private schools are of different hues and shades. There are some private schools which have been established for some time and are reputed. But there are also a large number of small-time private schools that have opened in different colonies. They don't have infrastructure. By the same point of time, they charge
A lot of money.
minuscule fee. Actually, they budget private schools, and then people feel that at least teachers there show up on time. At least the classes are conducted regularly.
So
and therefore-
shouldn't this be there in the government schools as well?
Definitely.
Because so how should the government go about it?
So
How should they improve their standards?
One of the concerns with government schools has been that how to sort of manage accountability and incentive structures such that there is a general sort of interest created among the stakeholders. But definitely the accountability mechanisms could be could be considered. Some better accountability mechanisms could always be there. But at the same point of time, I think there needs to be greater decentralization, greater community participation. It has also been, at least anecdotally, people have said that where panchayats and village community especially have been involved in active participants in the process, the government schools there actually impart very good quality education. So it has to be a collective effort.
Yeah, do you think public-private partnership, if it's there, would it help?
Well,
Because-
public-private partnership now needs to be understood in different dimensions. One could say that we have already had a public-private partnership model with aided schools, where private enterprises opened the schools, and the government provided them significant aid to the.
But no, I'm talking in the sense that I'm asking you in the sense that shouldn't the government schools have some private intervention so as to raise the standards?
So that has been recently tried in at least in Haryana, that a proposal was floated that some elite private schools shall adopt some government schools to improve learning outcomes in those schools.
Yes.
Now, this is a very recent step. We still await results. At the same point of time, sometimes it suggests that government, I do not know, I mean, if it suggests that government is abdicating its responsibilities by having an external participant doing a job that is the very job of the school. So if we are inviting private schools to adopt government schools, then it raises a question about the efficiency of the model, and more than efficiency, the fairness of it, that it suggests that government is perhaps abdicating its primary function in its own systems. I'm not even touching on the fact that the government decided to privatize education, which was in most discourses considered to be an essential function of the government. But accepting that it has done that, then should it also invite private schools to now adopt government schools to impart better teaching, which is essentially the job of the school.
Okay. So since you have worked so much on the Right to Education Act, what do you think? How has it been implemented? It's been already been 7 years since the act came into force. Do you think it has been implemented properly, or do we get the results that we wanted from this act?
I think in the life of socio-economic legislation, 6 years is a relatively short time. So we can only have some trends in these 6 years. There have been some problems. There's some problems with the legislation itself, which actually throws a larger question of efficacy of having a legislation for socio-economic rights as opposed to judicial declarations. Legislation have a solidifying effect on entitlements. So Right to Education Act, when compared to the judgments which held right to education under as a right under Article 21, seems to be under-inclusive, because
No,
the right to education.
Article 21A is there too. So.
Yes, but Article 21A only recognizes right to elementary education from age of 6 to 14.
Right.
So we are missing out on 0 to 6 and 14 to 18.
Right.
So to that extent, because the early childhood care component is left out, and the secondary education, given that secondary education is minimal for employability, so we need to look at the limiting effect of the legislation as well. Second is the enforcement mechanism of right to education. It is the primary administrative body is the National and State Commission for Protection of Child Rights. They don't seem to have significant enforcement powers. So that also is a concern. Right to Education Act does not also ensure that education is not commercialized. Now, what had happened with the Supreme Court judgments, for example, in TMA Pai case, even when they recognized the right of private enterprises to operate schools under 19(1)(g), they clearly stipulated, although ambiguously, that education shall not be a trade.
Yes.
it
Can it be
shall
a business?
it cannot be a business. It shall always be a service. Um, and while they can make some profit
Profit out of
from education, the surplus can only be reasonable surplus.
it. Right.
Right. Now, nowhere it has been defined what this reasonable surplus is, and Right to Education Act doesn't do that job either. Right. So yes, there are a couple of things that the Right to Education Act from the beginning has left.
Mm-hmm.
Now, coming to the enforcement part of it, first I'd mentioned that the legislative agency itself could do with more powers. It is at best a recommendatory body. Second is that it seems not as doing a lot of things. Right to Education Act in terms of inputs, how a school should be, what minimum qualifications teacher should be at, what basic infrastructure required. It identifies stakeholders, invests them with rights and obligations. So all of those things are there in Right to Education. But let's say certain features of the Act that may be, amenable to a more immediate realization. At least those parts of the Act, judicial enforcement has been there for some time. For example, issues of admissions, of admissions under Section 12(1)(c), which provides 25% seats for a minimum of 25% seats in private schools for people from disadvantaged groups and weaker sections. So those issues which have a more immediate basis, they seem to have they seem to dominate in the number of cases on Right to Education that have been filed, and the issues which are more programmatic in nature, which require a continuous monitoring, etc., such as establishing schools, having adequate infrastructure in schools, having qualified teachers in schools. These are things which are more programmatic in nature. On that, we find very limited, very rare sets of cases. So those are the parts which don't see enough judicial enforcement. Even when we looked at in one of our studies, when I was at Vidhi, we did a study on enforcement of Right to Education and Right to Education Act, and it seemed that even with the administrative body, the SPCR and NCPCR,